Hey guys, today I'm going to talk a little bit about growth in a dental practice. Now, growth in a dental practice is an area that there's a lot of misconceptions about. I've talked about it before on the podcast a little bit. It's an area that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. So what I wanted to do is I feel like I have a pretty unique perspective of being able to see a lot of different dental practices in a lot of different areas of the country and actually seeing the growth trends that occur and being able to have the conversations with the owners of like what actually made those things happen. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about some of the numbers I've seen be attainable, and I'm going to talk about some of the ways that those doctors attribute that growth, what they attribute it to. Here's today's podcast about growth in a dental practice. Growth in a dental practice, as I said, is something that has a few different connotations. So the way I define growth in a dental practice is I define that as a revenue number, as the production from the practice as a whole, and that production growing to higher levels. Now, we can have a totally different discussion about how to minimize overhead so that your net profit is growing. But this episode of the Start Your Dental Practice podcast is specifically geared towards growth from a production standpoint and how I've seen it occur in dental practices. So, how do you grow as a dental practice? So the first step in every single one of these opportunities, every single one of these occasions that I've seen dental practices grow dramatically. I'm not talking about a 2 or 3% growth year over year, just those minor bumps up that maybe came from a fee schedule increase or something similar to this, like that. I'm talking about in a mature practice where they had felt like they'd plateaued for a little while to where they just kind of explode, where they grow much bigger. So I'm going to use a few different case studies, but the very first step of every single one, it was the same thing for every one of these practice owners that I spoke with, and that was that they had to make the intentional decision to grow. So they had to make an intentional decision that they wanted to grow and that they were going to grow, and they had to go out and make that occur. They had to implement some things to make those things happen. So, step one, you've got to tell yourself, I'm going to grow, and then you've got to tell yourself, I can grow. You have to allow yourself mentally to be prepared to grow. So, that's the first step. It sounds a little bit weird, but whenever you do anything in business, you've got to have some type of intention. You have to have something on the horizon to be going towards. And these practice owners said, hey, we're going to grow. And that is literally the first step they took into making that happen. They said, we're going to be intentional about this. We're going to figure out a way to actually increase our revenue. And then they went out and did it. So step one, make the intentional decision that you are going to grow, and allow yourself the mindset to tell yourself that you can grow. I've got a lot of practice owners will talk about growth, and they're just like, nope, it's not possible. I can't grow anymore. There's no way for me to be able to grow. And then and that's it. They have this limiting belief that they're never going to grow because they don't think they can grow. For the most part, some instances that might be true. They may be a mature practice that has, that they're running, 40 or 50 hours a week in clinical hours, and they have 5 ops that are completely full from the moment they step into step in the door to the moment they walk out the door at night. That's a possibility. But a lot of people, I believe that is a limiting belief. So I think I've talked about that a little bit in the podcast. A limiting belief is basically something that you just internalized as being a truth, whenever in fact it's not a truth. It's just something that you're using as an internal belief system that has created this mental excuse for yourself. So anyway, that is the first step, is the intentional decision. So the second step is to figure out where that opportunity actually lies in your dental practice. Now, there are multiple different areas that practices can grow in. So in order for me to kind of give you a little bit of a background on that, I'm going to tell you how I've seen practices grow. There's not a ton of different ways I've seen practices actually grow substantially overnight or in a year's time. But here is my list of ways I have seen practices actually grow. Number one, their pricing structure, their fee schedules. We've had a lot of practices come in and they've inherited these old fee schedules that were set many years in the past, and they are actually underneath the reimbursement rates for the insurance companies. However, they don't know that they're below the insurance rates for the reimbursement rates for the insurance companies because they've never checked it. So that's a very, very quick way to be able to find some money if you're one of those people. Get a fee schedule analysis done. If you want to be able to check and give yourself kind of a litmus test, you can go to fairhealthconsumer.org. That's fairhealthconsumer.org. You can log on to that. That is the analysis from the insurance companies, from the Affordable Care Act created that website, I believe, to where all the insurance companies have to log and submit their data to the government. And you can check on fairhealthconsumer.org dental codes for your zip code to see what percentile you are in. So you go on there, you hit in D1110, and you then can see what a fee schedule is for that specific fee. I think you can do up to 5 a day or something like that. It's a really good way to kind of give yourself an idea of if you're in the right ballpark or not. That thing comes out with the 80th percentile, which is what most people tell you to look to shoot for anyways. So it's a really great free resource that you can go on and check your practices fee schedule. It's also a great way to be able to check out practices fee schedules that you may be looking to acquire to see if maybe they're underpricing their services. So that's the first one, pricing. It's a pretty easy one to be able to fix. You can also go to usually like Shine and Patterson. They'll give you a free fee schedule optimization table most of the time. They're not the best because they're typically those are based off of data from the practice management softwares. From what I remember the last time I spoke with a rep, that's what they said is they kind of compile other people's fee schedules and kind of just shoot those things out. So may or may not be the best thing, but it's only based off of the specific practice management system. So if you go to Shine, you're going to get the Dentrix version of that. If you go to Patterson, you'll get the EagleSoft version of that. So not the best data source, but it definitely works in a pinch. So that's the first one's pricing. The second one, this is a really big one, and it's actually kind of difficult to figure out, is getting better at scheduling. I had one practice that they went from they'd been in maturity stage. When I talk about stages of the business life cycle, any business goes through different stages, and they'll go in kind of a startup phase where they're just getting started, and then they'll go into which is usually hyper growth, because like every month they've got like 20% growth because they're starting out small. But there's just the natural growth stage, which is if you were like be following along like on a graph, it would be just kind of a 45-degree angle going up and to the right. That's the growth stage. It's kind of in that range. It's typically not super steep, typically not super small. It's just growing. And then there's the maturity stage, which kind of it evens off and you kind of plateau. And so that line we're talking about, if you can visualize that, it just kind of goes flat. It just goes straight. And then eventually you'll hit some type of a decline. And then eventually you'll sell a practice or retire. Every business kind of goes through those different cycles with some varying degree. Maybe there's some stagnation, maybe there's some inflation, maybe there's some other areas that come into that. However, most dental practices follow that same trend. I had a practice that was in maturity, and the owner said, "Hey, I'm gonna grow," and they just really, really, really focused on scheduling. They made an intentional decision to have everyone in their practice be on top of the scheduling. They really incentivized the office manager to become a better surveyor of the schedule. And they went in 1 year from about $750,000 in revenue to $1.2 million. I've spoken with this practice owner many times, and they say that was the number one thing they did. whenever you make these intentional decisions to grow, there's a lot of things that go into it. It's not just one thing. It's kind of a melting pot of a bunch of different things, but there's always one area that shines. And for her, it was the scheduling of the practice. For the scheduling, it grew their practice from $750,000 practice a year to $1.25 million a year in revenue in 1 year, and they're going to be doing more than that this year probably. And she said that was of the growth, that was probably 50% of it was the scheduling. Was getting better at scheduling. So they invested a little bit in training in their people to be scheduling better. And that was where their opportunity was. She said they knew that their scheduling wasn't great. So that's the second one, scheduling. The third one is the services that can be offered. So services, when you think about it, in any dental practice, the only things that you can do for any practice to grow is you can either sell more dentistry, which is offer more services, or you can serve more patients. So you can either have more patients come in the door, or every patient that comes in the door can have a higher chance to give you a higher dollar amount of money for the services rendered. There's only two options to be able to grow any dental practice. So one of the ways to be able to do that is to offer more services. So things like sedation, things like implants, adding some endo whenever you've never done endo before. Just basically breaking away from that bread and butter dentistry model. It's a great way to be able to increase that revenue. I've seen practices add, somewhere in the realm of $250,000 to $400,000 a year in 1 year, adding in these services. Now, again, I said it's a melting pot. You can't just add the service then magically make more money. You've got to add the service, and then you've got to work on some other areas. So you got to make sure that people are accepting those treatments. That's a big one, actually, adding more services. So other things like adding in, some ortho. If you've never done ortho, rather than referring it out, adding some easy ortho is a great way to be able to do it. It's getting more competitive to be able to do that. However, it's a very viable way to grow your practice and grow your revenue. So that's the third way to be able to grow, is adding new services. The fourth, and this is where the practice owner that was doing the scheduling, this fourth one is the other 50%, and that is case acceptance. They worked very hard on getting better at case acceptance. Worked very hard at making sure that whenever they came in, that they were doing a really good job of explaining to the patient the services that they were going to be providing, the benefits of those services, and allowing the patient the opportunity to accept those treatments. We've got a lot of people out there that they feel like they are already good at communicating with their patients. And I'll be honest, this happens in every single industry in the nation, in the world. If you are a provider, if you are, somewhat of a master of your trade, you forget how the most basic terminology that comes out of your mouth can be unheard of from your audience. For example, personally, I guarantee if you've listened to this podcast for more than 5 or 6 episodes, I probably have came in from left field from something in your ear at some point in time where I've said something or a guest has said something that you may not have heard of. Especially if I talked about anything accounting related. If you go back and listen to one of my tax ones, I'm sure that I didn't do a fantastic job of explaining everything out. And it's because I've lived in this world and this language for about 15 years at this point. So it's hard for me to remember what I didn't know before I knew all this information. So when I use some of the words that I use, if I'm using things like, like cost basis or stock basis or distributions or pay or things like that, I might be thinking of it from like a definition term, and the person hearing it may be thinking about it in some other fashion. And so our messages may be mixed. A lot of dentists, whenever they're communicating with their patients and the way they present their cases, that is definitely a roadblock for a lot of people, because you don't remember what it's like to not be educated in those matters sometimes. So not speaking that language to people can be a very big way of helping with that. The practice that went from $750,000 to $1.25 million or $1.2 million, that was the other half of it, was case acceptance. So it was scheduling and case acceptance, kind of a mix between those two. That was where her opportunity was, and that's where she went out and really worked on it. So she went out and got training on it, and her staff got training to help bolster her ability to do that. And it absolutely worked. She crushed it. It was amazing. My favorite case studies. So that's the fourth one, case acceptance, working intentionally to be better at communicating with your patients and allowing them the opportunity to accept treatment and acceptance. The fifth one, recall. So this is an area that is a problem for a lot of practices. Whenever you're growing, if you remember back what I said, you can either do more services per patient or you can see more patients. A lot of practices have some issues with their recall. They just are bad at it. I mean, they're just not good at getting their patients to come back. And there can be a multitude of different reasons for that. The first one might be that your patient experience, with that, whatever that terminology means, whatever that person experienced when they walked into the practice that day, whenever they actually came in and had their experience of going to the dentist, they didn't like it. That could be one reason they didn't come back. That's usually the biggest reason. The second biggest reason is because you never communicated with that patient of when they're supposed to come back. You didn't educate them that that their recall is an important part of their oral health so that they can fight decay. Them coming back for a hygiene visit is an important reason for them to be coming back, and that we actually want them to come back, and then telling them the day that they're supposed to come back. A lot of practices just don't do that. As I'm saying these things, I'm even internally saying, well, don't say that, because these guys know that that's important to do. But I'll be honest with you guys, you as dentists may understand that, you may not. If you're out there thinking that, hey, I never thought about that, then great, that this is your education. But if you're thinking that, your staff may not realize that. Your staff may not think about it in the same way as you do. The patients don't think about that. They may not think about it the way that you do. I will tell you personally, from someone that's outside of the dental industry, this is a perfect example. Whenever I was going to the dentist before I started working with the dentist, I had no clue that I was supposed to go back every 6 months. And I'm someone who now is just like, well, of course you're supposed to go back every 6 months. You may need to go back more than every 6 months, depending on what type of decay you have or what the treatment plan is. I had no clue, and I'm a pretty educated. I've got 2 college degrees, a business professional, and I have a pretty healthy set of teeth. I've had like one cavity in the past 20 years, so I had no clue. And so that's something you can't take for granted. You can't take any of these things for granted, that your staff knows it or that the patients know it. So being very, very serious about fixing your recall system is a big, big, big way to be able to help your practice out. So it's a way to stop kind of the bleeding of the losing of the patients. The difference in 60% of your patients coming back and 85% of your patients coming back is huge. I mean, let's think about that in numbers terms. If you've got, let's say, 100 patients a week coming in, so say 25 a day, so that's 4 days a week. If you've got 60% of your patients coming back, that means 60 of the 100 are going to come back. That means that of the 100 people you saw this week, 10 people per day are not coming back that you saw today in those days. If you get to, let's say 90%, then that means 90 people are coming back. That means that only 2.5 people you see a day are coming back. That's 7.5 people a day that you don't have to go out and find if you can fix a recall system. And 60% versus 90%, 90% is crushing it, is doing a great job. 60% is kind of average. 60% is kind of what we see a lot of people who just don't have a okay system in place and then just have let it go for 20 years and don't really follow to see if it's working or not. 60% is if you've never looked at your recall system and you just assume someone's taking care of it, and you just assume that your practice is running and healthy from that, and you've never looked at the number of people that came in today, how many of them got back on the schedule, and then how many people of those actually showed up. If you're not looking at that, I would be surprised if you are outside of the 50 to 75% range. So this is a huge way to be able to grow your practice, is to fix that recall system. That's the reason a lot of people sell those systems, is because it's such a good way to be able to fix that problem. So that's the fifth way is recall, fixing your recall. The sixth way is a way that not a lot of people are going to like, but it's definitely a way to do it, is to expand your hours. Expand the amount of hours you are actually seeing patients. That is a way to be able to absolutely grow your practice if you have a well-ran practice. If you are already at a high number of operatories, or your operatories are filled to capacity every day, then you are going to have to do something. At that point, you don't care if you fix your recall system. You don't care if you have better scheduling because you're already packed full, right? At that point, you're looking for ways to be able to do something better rather than anything else. But an outside of the box way of thinking is to say, hey, if we're cram packed during all the hours of the week, then let's add 4 hours in the week, and that should naturally give you, if you're working 32 hours a week and you add another 4 hours a week, you're gonna add about 10 to 15% just by doing that, if you can continue those systems and run efficiently. So that is the sixth way, is expanding your hours. It's not a popular thing because that means you got to work longer. It means logistically you got to figure out how to staff your people during those times. But again, it's not ever easy to do. So you have to be intentional about it, and you got to figure these things out. The next thing to do would be to add operatories. We've got a lot of practices that I'll tell you the number one thing that I hear from practices, the number one regret I have from mature practices is that they have no more physical space. We've got a lot of docs out there that they'll have 4 or 5 operatories, sometimes even less. I've heard of practices with 3 operatories, and they'll have 3 hygiene rooms, and then they'll have 2 doctor rooms. So the doc's working out of 2 things, and so there's no room for an emergency chair, and working out of 2 chairs is for the doctor is something that is, not saying anybody out there, you've got to go towards this. I'm just telling you what I've seen practices that have made a lot of money. What they do is that the doctor typically works out of quite a few chairs, or they have a lot of doctor chairs available, to say the least. Is that at those in those 2 chairs, then they're handcuffed at that point. They cannot do any more dentistry because they can't bring an associate in. They can't add any spaces for being able to bring more patients in, and their hygiene chairs are full. So 5 chairs is kind of the one doctor side, and that's in bread and butter dentistry. Now, if there's some more advanced dentistry going on, if there's extra services being done, then then that's a different story. But that is a big issue for a lot of practices. The 7th one is adding operatory chairs. So adding operatory chairs can allow you to have more capacity to be able to do more dentistry. And for some people that's an issue, but if you're not at capacity, if you're not cram packed every day, then that is something that's not going to be a worry of you. So the next one, increasing your efficiency. So if you're cram packed every day, you're busy every day, then a way for you to be able to have better revenue is to be more efficient with how your time is being ran. So this is the time where you're going to be actually looking to see how efficient you are actually getting through things during the day. Where's your wasted time? At this point, you're searching for inefficiencies in your practice to where you, as the provider, or your hygienist, as the medical providers, are wasting time during the day, where you're standing still and not generating revenue. So an increase in your efficiency can absolutely be a way to be able to increase revenue. That was the 8th one. The 9th way to increase your revenue is to get new patients. You notice I didn't start with this one. This is where most people start at. I hate whenever people start with, I'm going to go out and spend a bunch of money on marketing because I want more money. I don't like that mentality, guys. Don't think that just because you start a marketing campaign, you're going to make more money. New patients are something that you use to fill a hole that's in your practice. You have to have capacity available. If you think about it like as a capacity problem, so if you think like a circle and that's your capacity, and right now you're at 75% capacity, you've got 25% of that circle still outstanding. New patients is what you use to put back, is to fill that hole out. If that hole, if that circle is already at 90, 95, 100%, then you getting new patients in is not the best way to be able to fix your problem. Your problem can be fixed by any one of these other options that we've talked about most of the time. But if you do something like add an operatory chair, then you might be expanding that circle, which would then be a reason why you would need to go get new patients if you couldn't service that off the back of your recall system. So, new patients, absolutely, positively, a good way to be able to grow your practice. It's a great way to be able to come in and liven up, to be able to, if you add, let's say you've added services, you've added some sedation dentistry, then going out and finding the new patients that would enjoy or see the value in sedation dentistry is a fantastic way to grow your practice, an intentional decision that is made. And we all know that marketing is more effective whenever you have a specific service that you're offering. I've had a lot of interviews with marketing experts, and that is one of the main things they talk about, is that you have to be intentional of what you're marketing, and that the more specific you are with your marketing, the better you're going to do. So new patients is another way. Adding providers is another way that I've seen practices grow in revenue. So providers meaning new doctors, or meaning new hygienists, which most of the time that means additional ones, but you can absolutely have growth in a dental practice by removing bad apples. So let's say you remove a bad hygienist, put a great hygienist in there. You take out a hygienist that's doing, $75 an hour in services, and you add one in that can do $200 an hour in services. They do 45 to 50-minute exams, plus they just knock it out of the park with getting scaling root planning acceptance. Then you're going to see an increase in your revenue at that point. You're going to be able to see that increase. I talked about services earlier. By the way, that services, I would include the hygiene team in making the services grow. So adding providers is an absolutely tried and true way to be able to grow your practice and revenue, because if you add, let's say you're a practice that has 7 operatories, you're currently working 2 of them, you've got 3 hygiene chairs, and you've got more than enough patients, your circle is full, and you have the opportunity to actually be bursting out of your circle. You can then add a provider to those 2 extra chairs, add an associate dentist to those 2 extra chairs, and your revenue will grow. As long as you have a way to fill those holes. So new patients may be the way you're going to do that for the new doc, but it's absolutely a way to be able to do it. So, okay, let's see. To recap, I've talked about pricing, scheduling, services, case acceptance, recall, expanding your hours, adding operatory chairs, increasing your efficiency as a team, new patients, and adding providers. The only other ones I can really think of off the top of my head is, I know I'm trying to think of the people that will be reaching out to me by email. I was like, oh, you forgot this. I touched on it briefly. There's 2 that come to mind. So the hygiene team, yes, you can absolutely increase revenue by having your hygiene team do better. But I think that from a revenue standpoint, unless your hygiene team is just really, really doing poorly, that most of these, that if you were to go in with these services, you do pretty well. So yes, adding hygiene to that list would be a valid way to do it, and that might be where your opportunity lies. So that could very well be it. The other one that I've seen grow really big, I've seen dentists that have bought out competing dentists, and they have grown very quickly. Had one dentist who was doing around $1 million a year, and he bought out a small competitor that was close by, and he added about $300,000 a year in revenue. Honestly, his costs for that were pretty small. I think he paid like $100,000 for that $300,000. So he's cash flowing on that very quickly. He's got a 10-year note on that $100,000, so he's paying like $1,000 a month or something like that, and he's getting an extra $25,000 in a month. And his cost, he's staffing with the same exact staff, so his staffing cost didn't change at all. So it's a very valid way of doing it is to buy out other people. It's a way to be done. You've got to get a good deal on it, and you've got to have a really good way of getting them in. This specific practice has a really good team in place, and they were able to bring those people in pretty easily, and it was a pretty good price that the owner paid for those patients, because he had about $300,000 in revenue. However, the selling doctor had actually more than that. It was just he got a really good deal on it. So it's definitely a possibility buying patient charts. You just got to be pretty smart about how you do that. If you don't run a profitable practice, this is a little bit more high level. But if you run a very efficient from an overhead efficiency standard for a dental practice, and you're going to buy someone else out, a lot of these people sell charts based off of like a one-time price plus a percentage of revenue that comes in. The thing is that you've got to make sure that you've got a profitable practice in the front to make sure that's going to be worth it in the long run. Because let's say you are paying 30% of revenue for that patient, you better have a practice that's running at somewhere around 50 to 60% of overhead. And then you got to make sure that if you're paying an associate to do that work for you, you need to make sure that you're not paying them too much of that revenue as well, because you could very easily be taking a wash on that for that time frame of whenever you're coming in. And then again, if your circle, like we talked about, if your circle is already full, then you're actually costing yourself a ton of money in opportunity costs, because the time that was spent on servicing those patients could have been served servicing a patient that you didn't have to take a 25% haircut on, and sometimes that's on top of the insurance write-off. So those are a couple other ones that are there are additional ones that are very valid ways to do it, but I feel like the other ones we talked about are typically more common for me to see. So those are the ways I've seen practices grow, specifically with some examples of practices that have actually grown. I'd also like to say that you have to really understand where your practice is. You have to really sit down and analyze where your practice is standing to be able to understand where your opportunity is, so that whenever you try to intentionally grow, you pick one of these or a mix of these. I would say probably two to four would be where I would focus my energy and effort on and my team on, because that is where you're going to be able to figure out where your opportunities for growth are. And guess what? Guess how you do that? You look at your numbers. You look at what is going on in your practice. You look at your benchmarks. You look at your how you're performing. You look at your staff, how they're performing, and you go from there. To recap up to now, step one was you had to make an intentional decision to grow. Step two is to figure out where your opportunity lies and understand where your practice is actually sitting right now. And then looking at that list that I just gave you, pricing, scheduling, services, case acceptance, recall, expanded hours, adding operatory chairs, being more efficient, having more new patients, adding providers, helping with your hygiene team, and possibly adding in existing patient or buying patient charts off of competing dentists or buying out other dentists. All ways to be able to expand revenue, increase growth. The next one is to actually initiate a game plan. And your team's going to have to be involved with this, guys. Like, you're going to have to involve them and have them be a part of it, because as a business owner, you can only do so much on your own, especially in the unique industry of dentistry where you're going to be in the back most of the day, and you're going to be depending on your team to do a lot of this work. And it may not be just your team that's there. It may be outsourced providers for marketing. It might be outsourced providers for for training. It could be a lot of different things. But you're gonna have to depend on other people. Be aware, you're gonna have to depend on other people to do some of these things for you. So you've got to make sure the right people are doing it for you, and you've got to make sure that they're doing what is necessary to help you grow. Important caveat to keep on that, guys, is that if the person that is there is the right person, and you're still not growing, maybe they just don't have the training, or maybe they've got some type of mental roadblock that they're trying to get past that you're going to have to help them get past. So you having a conversation with them, you holding them accountable, and you being a part of that process is incredibly important. So we're running towards the end of the podcast episode. So really, again, to recap one last time, there's 3 steps. That's you have to have an intentional decision to grow. The second step is you've got to figure out where the opportunity is and understand where your practice is standing right now so that you know where you are. And then you're going to have to initiate a game plan with your team to nourish that opportunity that you may have, to figure out where that horizon is, to start moving towards that horizon, setting that goal and helping your team, initiating something within your team to get there. So that's the third step. So 3 easy steps to growing your dental practice in 2016. Brought to you from a CPA that just loves dentistry and super fascinated about growth in dental practices, because there's some that grow and there's some that don't. These are the things that I've seen help practices grow. I want you guys to be very, very wary of people selling you services that say that this is the answer to everything. Like, oh, fix your hygiene team, everything's fixed, you make $1 million now, yay. That just doesn't happen. You've got to figure out which of these areas in your practice, and it could be all of them. It very well could be all of them. However, almost every practice I've ever looked at does a couple of these areas well, and then there's a few areas that are deficient, and they just got to really fix some of these specific areas. So anyway, I hope this has been interesting. Send me an email if you have any questions. If you like what you heard today, it's jonathan@dentistmetrics.com, and go out there and grow your dental practice.